There's a lot of time spent here at the Banff Center on working with new music, things that are notated for performers of all different disciplines to engage with. But there's also a streak of creating new things without notation as well. The inspiration that we draw from around us here in the Rocky Mountains allows us so much opportunity to engage with the space around us and to even improvise our own sounds, our own pieces, and indeed our own ensembles. The person leading the charge on these improvisations is double bassist Gahlord Dewald, who joins us now here on Classic 107. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe you can walk us back to the moment where you are actually you're going about your education and your development on your instrument. You're working on your craft. Well, is there a moment where you're like, I don't know that I really, this is the only thing that I want to do. I want to break free.
Yeah, what's funny is it's kind of the other way around almost. So I started out doing a lot of jazz, like normal jazz music and big band music, that kind of thing, in high school and so forth. And then I ended up getting into classical the other way around, right? So in order to get access to a double bass, the little town that I lived in Grand Forks, North Dakota, so just south of your listening area. That's correct, yeah. So the Grand Forks Central and Red River High Schools kind of combined together, and they could field like a little chamber orchestra. And of course they needed a double bassist, and I wanted to play double bass in the jazz band, and the orchestra director at the time, Mr. Carrier, was like, well, you can take the double bass, but you got to come to my orchestra too. And so it was like a give and trade. And I got lucky. He programmed a lot of really interesting music. I remember playing Charles Ives and all kinds of stuff in this little thing, which I kind of wouldn't have gone there,
Right.
And so that was actually, it turned out to be really, really interesting and kind of formative. Like I didn't respect him enough, in retrospect.
It's not always the move for music teachers.
Like that, it's totally the case. But I got the bass and I played jazz. And I did that stuff, and I did this orchestra stuff. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then in college, I got to do more and more of that. And I transferred around a bunch in college, but I ultimately ended up in southern Vermont at a place called Marlborough College. And they have a very famous summer program there. But I was there during the year for a liberal arts major. And it's a tiny little school, so they didn't have an orchestra. So I focused on a lot of solo music, like music for solo double bass. And I took lessons from a composer and double bassist that was down in Western Mass named Salvatore Macchia. And since he was interested in contemporary music and double bass and stuff like that, so that kind of got me going in more of the classical and solo realm. And it was sort of the mix of both of those at that kind of moment in my life. It was sort of like the right mix of things. There were a bunch of free jazz players that had moved to that area over the years. So there was a bunch of people that used to play with Cecil Taylor that kind of lived locally. So you'd go to the jazz jam, which normally people sit and play stuff out of the real book or whatever, and it's a lot of fun. But there to be 2 or 3 songs from the real book, and then 1, 2, 3, go. We're just free blowing, and it's with people of very high caliber of that stuff. So you had to quickly kind of pick it up.
Yeah, well, if you're leaning into that world of a Cecil Taylor or a Don Cherry or a Norma Coleman, that's just absolutely the thing you have to be able to do. As you think back on being in Grand Forks of all places, that's such an interesting place to start that kind of journey. And what kind of reactions were you getting from the people who were around you at that time as you were developing those interests and that sort of unique musical language that you inhabit so freely now?
Right. So the Grand Forks interesting music scene at that time, when I was going to high school, the rock bands really prided themselves, the little scene that I was in, really prided themselves on making original music. Right? So there weren't within my set of friends, there weren't cover bands or that. You could do 1 or 2 covers, but it had to be a deep cut, and so being able to, create interesting sounds was part of the game, kind of from the get-go, from when I was 7th or 8th grade. and then it just sort of skyrocketed as I got east, and then started doing the free improv stuff. So, in Grand Forks, it's like, well, whatever, the kids are making a racket, like either way, right? They're making a racket.
There's
either
space
way,
to make
right?
a racket
exactly,
too.
right. There's a lot of open space.
Right, exactly. Well, they'll
space.
hear you clear out in Minot.
Exactly, out to Minot.
You talk about a lot of different locales
Yeah.
in your study. We're talking about the prairies of North Dakota. We're talking about the beautiful rolling sort of hills of Vermont.
Yeah.
Now you work in locales all over the world. What do you think you take from those different sort of inspiration points, and how do they build a foundation for the work that you do now?
I think a big part of what I do I end up focusing on community of practice, which is sort of a little bit nerdy way of thinking about it, but who are the actual people that I'm working with as collaborators? So especially as an improviser, the kind, instead of having notation on the page, the notation is kind of embodied in us, right? We're playing 1, 2, 3, go, but it's I'm doing the music that I normally do, and if I'm working with a collaborator and I know who they are, I kind of know, the score is ourselves in this way. And Rajna Swaminathan, who's a composer and Mithungam player, a percussion player, kind of talks about this idea a lot, in her dissertation, if you like reading dissertations.
All right.
It's a well-written one. And that idea of who the people are that you work with. And again, in growing up in Grand Forks, there was this crew of rock and roll people that really wanted to make original music, and that was foundational for me as a kid. It's it has to be original or it's not cool, right? That's just how I felt as a kid. And then once I move out east and I'm in Vermont, I'm with Rafe Malik, who's a trumpet player, with Cecil Taylor, and a bunch of other players from that scene. And they're we do this 1, 2, 3, go music, and it's not just play whatever you want, but it is just play whatever you want. And you have to learn how to work with that as you go. And then now I live in Hawaii. I moved there with Leluhua Lanzalati, who you've also interviewed.
Yes, indeed.
And there I've got a new set of people that I've been there for a little while now, but learning to work with different people in different, the kind of traditional music in Hawaii, but also the local avant-garde and classical scene. So it's more than the individual locations, it's who are the people that I'm working with and can come into contact with.
It's the communities, not necessarily the landscapes
Right.
that can inform that kind
Right,
of stuff.
and it's both. Grand Forks, you got to stay inside most of the year, so it's okay,
Gotta
we're
do
going to be
something.
inside working.
Yeah.
Hawaii is we're outside all the time, so you got to get an outside base to pull
Right.
that one off in the same way.
Sure. So now we're fully entrenched in your sort of improv practice.
Yeah.
How does the development of the skills you need in that space, if you're going into a place with all these free blowers, as you said before, what sorts of skills do you need to hone that maybe you're not going to pick up if you're so focused on your craft, you're thinking about playing in an ensemble professionally, you're becoming a solo artist performing the masterworks of the Western musical canon? What other skills have to be in place in order to work in the spheres that you operate in?
Well, there's some of them are the same, right? So at the highest level, a lot of them are the same, right? And when you're working in a chamber ensemble, it's how do you gel with the other players in the chamber ensemble? Once you get to the point where it's beyond the notes on the page, it's many of the things are the same. It's how do I get along with people? Can I listen to other people? Can I respond to what energy are they bringing to a piece that I can then augment, or if I want to alter things? So some of that in the ensemble setting is very much the same as playing chamber music or anything else. It's just lots and lots of listening, and so that's one piece. But in the practice room, by myself, it's often exploring different timbres and textures and sounds. And in the same way that when I'm focused on notated music, I might be okay, I've got to practice these 8 bars so that I can nail them, when I go into the rehearsal tomorrow. In this kind of parallel world of free improv, it's okay, I want to have some things to say. I want to have some gestures, right? What kind of technical facility do I want to bring to the show? And then also, for my music, I'm really into the textural and timbral qualities of the double bass. So, like what kind of sounds can I get? Like how many varieties of col legno can I get, right? So like a classical musician, you know, might get like a col legno notation somewhere, and they're like, okay, cool, I'll slap the instrument and kind of move on and get through that part.
Yeah.
But I've spent hours and hours on it to be like, well, if I give it the same attention as I would normal arco playing, with where's the sounding point and where's the bow in relation to the bridge, and like what other kinds of sounds can I get and what kind of control can I get.
Yeah, so then you take those skills and you do still jump into ensembles from time to time. What sorts of things do you bring into that more structured experience as a result of the work that you do in this improvisatory space, that as you work with those other musicians, you're going, maybe this is a thing that I'm bringing that literally no one else is able to bring, and I can hear that. What is that quality that happens then?
Yeah, some of the stuff that I feel that I bring in is a little bit more fearlessness with the material. So like if a piece is notated to be like molto sul pont, which means to take the bow and move it close to the bridge of the instrument, which can either be really, really loud, or it can be, it has a brighter texture to it, a brighter sound. And if you go even further, it dissipates into kind of etherealness. And for contemporary music, which is most of what I play, I'll take a molto sul pont and I'll be like, all right, I'm gonna go all the way into like spectral harmonics with this sound and really try to push things as far as I can. So that's like the willingness to push things, kind of like, okay, there's the note on the page, but there's all the other things that aren't notated. And to take advantage of that and to bring a little bit of that sound. And also just the general hearing, you know, participating in the listening closely to all of us as an ensemble, and not being as worried about what's on the page. Can sometimes like help take a piece and like make it a little bit more vibrant, or, you know, less rigid in its interpretation.
So with all of those skills to push the spectral envelope a little bit, to have all that imagination, what sorts of criteria do you then give yourself as you are entering the space to kind of flip that coin over, I suppose?
For working with...
well, even as you're going back maybe into that improvisatory space, what then criterion do you then put upon yourself that you're taking from that experience of working in a more rigid setting?
Sure. And I don't worry too much about specific criteria on what I'm doing, but one thing that I do, and that I've encouraged all of the participants at BAMF here for this session, is to always bring your full self to the table. So like sometimes... in a free improv setting, it's easy to be like, okay, I'm gonna go just do 1, 2, 3, go, and whatever, and forget everything else that you've studied. And so here, where a lot of the students are participating in some free improv stuff over the course of the past month, like I try to remind people, like, you've spent a lot of time learning orchestral excerpts. You've spent a lot of time learning little pieces of music. You can bring those into your free improv in the same way that a jazz musician might quote another piece, or a hip hop artist might sample a song with a specific meaning to change the context of a work. You know, you've got all those like orchestral excerpts under your fingers, and you're only going to play them so many times. You might as well like bring them in here. You know, or bring any of these classical techniques or ideas about form or timbre or those kinds of stuff. You bring your whole self. Explore new sounds, but most of all, to bring your whole self.
You are working with lots of the participants here in the Interplay program at the BAMF Center, as you mentioned, a wide range of instruments covered along the way. What sorts of things, as you work with these musicians, maybe are you noticing, like this is a thing that like we really have to... Is there like an approach of like we've got to break this down?
No,
or is it?
It's actually I'm going to step in on it.
No, by all means.
What's been super exciting for me on this is on the first day, on the chamber side of it, it was sort of like okay, we're going to all get to know each other, whatever. And Joel Brennan, who's leading the faculty on the chamber side, was like, hey Gahlord, instead of us doing a like warm-up thing, could you just do some experimental something with us instead, right? And I'm like, okay, cool, I'll do that. And so I went in, and you know, before I started, I kind of wanted to get a gauge of like, okay, where are these folks at? You know, and I said, how many of you have done some experimental music or free improv or any of that? And like everybody raised their hand.
Wow.
Like everybody raised their hand. I've never seen it like that before. Like it's like 5 years ago, it would have been like one person timidly raising hand. This was like everybody was there. It's like there's been a changing of the guard.
What has changed then? What's changed in the atmosphere here that everybody wants to participate?
I don't know. So I would assume that on the academic side, there's a lot more interesting contemporary music that's been written in the last 20 years, that's like actually a lot of fun to play.
Sure.
And then a lot of the, new music ensembles in colleges and that kind of thing. And then also just a general awareness and interest in like experimental music or free improvisation generally. So, I mean, obviously something's happened because these participants are from all over the world in here, and it's like everybody raise their hands. So I was planning on being like, okay, I'll start people at the like baby steps and move it in, and I was like, okay, we're gonna just go for it. We're just gonna go for it, and so that's what we've been doing. And I gave a lecture a couple days ago where I tried to give some of the background of like, hey, there's free jazz and there's free improvisation, and they come from some kind of different backgrounds, and talked about George Lewis, who wrote a really influential essay, and does a great job of outlining some of like how does improvisation relate to contemporary classical music and that kind of stuff. But like generally speaking, in terms of like let's do it, there's some of them have free improvisation ensembles like back in Australia where they're already at. So some of this is like the things that we already know, which is A, the kids are all right? The kids are always all right. The kids are all right. And B is like it's not like there's a classical music and then they put that aside and go home and do some other, like there's a wide spectrum of skills and kinds of music. And I think like classical musicians notice that there's performance opportunities.
Sure. All contributing to the full self.
To the full self, right. And one of the participants, like I added some extra sessions for free improv at the request of one of the clarinetists, had said, it'd be great to have some chances to get together to play with people where we get to be musical, but don't have the stress of adding in another thing to rehearse, because they're performing a tremendous amount of music here. Yeah. But to be able to play with some folks who they're not already assigned an ensemble with, just like, let's get together and make some music and make some sound. And that's like a great way for musicians to get to know one another and make this kind of music. And everybody feels really comfortable doing it, and it's like it's definitely like a sea change from like even like 5 years ago.
So you talk about that timeline, and of course the other thing that has occurred in that timeline was this big once in a century pandemic that forced a lot of innovation out of musicians in order to find those opportunities to collaborate, to create, and then then to actually survive on that very base human level. Yeah. How much would you consider that also to be something of a factor in this sea change towards improvisation?
I hadn't thought of it, but I could see that. I could see that as a thing, because like having to work with an unfamiliar technology for many people would force that. Everyone kind of getting into like, I've got to get a mic and a recording, and then the challenges of performing with someone over an internet connection. That's because there's inherent gaps and lag, right? And so if your musical structures rely on a very steady, pulse, then that's going to be difficult to do. But you can also make some beautiful music in which everyone's operating on their own pulse, and that might be more successful in a distributed ensemble kind of way. Certainly, I think a lot of people had some time to sit and reevaluate like what's important. I think a lot of the things that music institutions did during the pandemic in terms of, certain people being laid off during the course of the pandemic, but other people not, and it's like. I think some of those changes encourage people to say, well, what am I interested in? Like if the institutions aren't always there going to support us through the actually difficult times, maybe I should focus on the stuff that I'm interested in. That might have opened up more room for people to explore kind of different ways of music making.
The Banff Center is a great place to do that. What are some of the things that maybe you've been interested in since you've been here over the last couple of weeks? What has this space, this iconic arts place here in Canada, what has that inspired in you to explore a bit further in your practice?
Well, one of the things, obviously the landscape here is very beautiful, so that's like fantastic just to like walk out and be like, oh, this is some really cool mountain, territory that's like really fun to look at. But musically, it's been really fun to do all the chamber music. It's been the notated chamber music, because I don't normally do much of that. I do a little bit of it, these days, but not very often. Most of the time I'm doing solo or a free improvisation ensemble. So being able to sit in and, play, there was a contemporary work by an Australian composer that I worked on with an ensemble here. So that was fun. And talking to other faculty, like being able to work side by side with the participants is really fun. So, that's like something that I see going back to Hawaii. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll see if I can find some other folks. So like, we'll do some notated music, add a little bit more of that back in. But that kind of chamber music stuff has been a lot of fun to do. Because again, and also just on double bass, there are lots of pieces for the double bass and chamber music, but generally speaking, there's relative to string quartets or other kinds of things.
Sure.
There's not so many of them, so it's been fun to hear that and to hear all the variety of programming in the shows has been fantastic.
When you inevitably bring this back, all of your practice, to Grand Forks,
yes,
as an example, because it's so analogous to so much of our audience in Manitoba, what sorts of reaction to your music are you hoping to get there? Now, we could ask that question about anything. Like if you were performing anywhere, what are you hoping to receive from the audience as they bring their full selves as listening participants? But to bring it back to that sort of Red River Valley context, what would you hope that they take away?
I think that most people can enjoy listening to a wide array of sounds, and that as a performer, a lot of it is like how we present it and the spirit in which we present it, right? There are some people who are just not going to be interested in contemporary music, and that's fine. Like there are kinds of music that I'm much less interested in as well. And most of those folks know to not come to a concert by a solo double bassist, right? Like they know off the bat, they're like, not going to be my vibe, know? And so I usually don't worry about that too much. And it's like, it's what you bring in that moment, and like the spirit in which you present it, and people can feel that. They can feel that in the room. Like when I played the Leila Hua's Alohi Lohi at one of the opening concerts, it's technically a very simple piece, but it demands a lot kind of emotionally and commitment-wise from the performer, and everybody in that audience was there for it. Like they were there for it. I got done with it, and they were like very quiet through the whole thing. And really attentive, and I would expect the folks back in Grand Forks, to be the same. I think there'll be someone who'll be like, "Oh, that was very interesting."
Yes,
or whatever. But there's always like a handful, 2 or 3 people that you meet at the end of a show that are like, "Wow, I've never heard anything like that before." And that's who I'm playing for.
So when we fill up the Ralph or the Betty with your concerts,
that's right,
they will know exactly what's going on. Maybe we'll settle for the Chester A. Fritz or something.
Yeah, I'll take the good old Chester Fritz.
Yes.
I'll take the good old Chester.
Amazing. We'll look forward to it, Gaylord. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Winnipeggers.
Yeah, I love Winnipeg.
Still friends across the border.
No, always. We do our best. Right? We're doing our best here. So.
Right on.
Take care.